Well, it's nice to see you all. And we have, I guess it's been quite a weekend if you're online, if you're on the Twitter world
It
with,
depends on what part of the Twitter world too.
I guess so. So what part of the Twitter world might
Our
we,
corner, our
what's
corner.
our, yeah, what is our corner? Benjamin, you want to tell us what our corner
Well,
is?
you guys got a leaky corner. This is the thing. We have to understand that like there's all these different like networks and stuff. It's like we're looking at a universe. So a lot of people that probably listening to this have no idea. Like
All
they're not
right.
connected to that if they are even on Twitter. But if you are on Twitter and you follow at least Leslie and myself, but I don't know to what extent the rest of you all have been engaged in this, then you might be more or less aware of what's going on. But in this very particular corner that has to do with gender, and then in within the subset of gender, it would have to do with gender critical subset, and then the I guess trans skeptical subset. And the gender critical is a wide tent, and it was kind of founded by people who describe themselves as radical feminists, but radical feminists themselves are constantly kind of tooling with their alignments. It's kind of a tribe, but it's a very rowdy tribe, and they're kind of always kind of positioning themselves in different ways. And then there's a core set of radical feminists who perpetually adopt a identitarian stance that they are speaking for women, and anybody who agrees with them is valid, and anybody who disagrees with them is misogynist. And it doesn't matter if you're a woman or a man and you disagree with them, because they're representing and standing for women. You are somehow against women, even if you are a woman. So there's within the radical feminist clade, or the that group of feminists, there is a just a way of thinking about opinion that is very rigid, and that is not able, it's really difficult for them to admit to any sort of flexibility or
Hmm.
humor to a certain extent. And they can tend to, when they jump on a topic, kind of rule it, and rule it in a certain way, like kind of force discourse into their terms of engagement, which are like you're either with us or you're a misogynist. And that same tact has been taken from them and used by trans rights activists and critical race theorists to also enforce their subgroups will upon the rest of discourse.
Uh,
That's the
I,
overview, but we can
I
get
have a
into
couple
what happened.
questions
Yeah.
about that. First of all, what is a radical feminist? What makes somebody a radical feminist? I don't really know. Jody?
No.
Okay.
R.I.P. Magdalene Burns, by the way. Okay.
Who's a
And
hero?
oh god, yeah, I remember Magdalene. Holy cow, I was a big fan of hers. She would make fun of she was great. She had this YouTube channel. She's passed on, but and Peachy Yogurt. There were a bunch of early rad femmes talking about this stuff, or not early rad femmes, but talking about this stuff early on. So a radical feminist, as I understand it, there's three, Benjamin, you can help me out. There's three like tenets, right? There's pornography, prostitution, and the gender stuff,
What?
being gender critical of gender. That they so anti-porn,
Okay.
porn, against prostitution, don't want to legalize it. It's wrong. And then the gender stuff is wrong. That they actually, my understanding is that they actually agree that gender is constructed, is socially constructed. They don't think sex then, but they do tie it to biology, that this gender role is imposed upon you because of your biology, and therefore biology is very real. Like you can't change your biology, but that gender roles are socially constructed by the patriarchy.
That sounds very reasonable.
Would you?
I don't know, gender roles in a way. Well, sorry, we can talk about that later. I mean, there is a division of labor also that's tied to our bodies, right? Men can't have babies, so that automatically there is some division of labor there that's kind of natural. You could argue.
I'm still wondering if this might not be explicit, but is there something that there's kind of a not so positive feeling about male sexuality? Like it seems like there's something about
You think?
Benjamin smiling. Yeah. Something's not okay about it. I detect.
Somebody in the chat, UI Win says, I would say female/lesbian separatism is a big tenet of radical feminism.
A lot of them do seem to be lesbians.
I think it would be very, we just get into a cul-de-sac if we try to split hairs over the category of radical feminists, but it is important to kind of give the lay of the land, but there are a bunch of subgroups and we can describe their behavior or kind of like their desire, like how they want to affect the world, right? As a political group, they want to impose their will based on their values on the rest of society, and that is a value neutral, well, it's a value laden statement, but everybody does that. We're always trying to do that, so I'm not saying that they're wrong for wanting to do that. That's just what we all
Well,
do.
it's also very woke too. You're right. Like it's because this notion, it's like that Uncle Tom thing, like this radical feminist stance of the patriarchy is kind of infused into everything. And if you go along with it and you don't fight against it, you're perpetuating it and you're participating in it, and it's internalized misogyny, kind of like that whole notion, like, is very familiar to the CRT stuff, I think.
Yeah.
And like the notion of white fragility, and if you're not talking about your white fragility, then you're participating in upholding white supremacy. It's a similar, that's what you're talking about, right, Benjamin?
There's different tactics that they adopted early on that have then been used against them, and that's one of the tactics. So before, if you look at like anti-wokeness, that's downstream from anti-SJW content. I'm just talking like YouTube content, anti-SJW cringe compilations, then became anti-woke, more solid arguments as social justice kind of spread through the institutions and took over discourse. More and more heavy hitters, so-called, came in and started to fight or argue against it. And that's where you have the switch on YouTube, at least, from these cringe compilations and kind of these scrappy upstart content creators to people like John McWhorter and Glenn Lowry and the IDW, and all that stuff comes on the scene. But what they're against is it's kind of the same. It's derived from social justice warriorship, which is also derived, before that was like feminist compilations and the feminist anti-feminist stuff that was going on back in the culture wars of 2014 with Gamergate. And so it's all the same type of tactics that are being used, that feminists, that certain types of feminist activists use are the same tactics that are used by what we call the woke. And the woke have taken it, and because of the way that it works, the feminists got their way, and so they're the part of the power structure. As James Lindsay spoke at the conference, the feminists said that we are the vulnerable. Patriarchy is the superstructure. We need to deconstruct patriarchy in order to liberate ourselves from this, our oppression. And then it went from gender. So they used the concept of gender to do that. And then gender was used to deconstruct sex. Like, okay, well, now these women are part of this patriarchy. Like, trans rights activists actually blame gender critical feminists for, like, as not blame, but they ascribe them they're part of the patriarchy, and the patriarchy is imposing these gender roles that are based on sex on everybody. And so the same sorts of tactics, the same sorts of identitarian tactics are used by the radical feminists, what we're calling, for the sake of argument right now, radical feminists, and the trans rights activists, and the CRT activists. And probably even like these Palestinian activists too, like these decolonizing, this decolonizing movement uses the same tactics. It's James Lindsay would call all of this the same thing. He would call it Marxism, where it's the same Marxist program. You just swap out class for gender or sex or all these different things, but it just affects the revolution over and over again. And so the feminists kind of are what we're calling feminists right now. They kind of are getting it from both sides. They're trying to use the tactics to regulate other people's behavior in their way, like the superstructure of culture, but they're also like getting eaten alive by the trans rights activists or the trans acceptance movement, and which are large number women, and that's why all the women orgs, all the official women orgs are now pro-trans, because they're following the same kind of trend.
That's where TERF came from.
And swerf. Do you know what swerf is?
Right.
No, I've never heard that one. What is
sex
that?
Sex worker exclusionary radical feminist.
Yeah.
Oh, for fuck's sake.
So, yeah, it is a kind of like an eating life. Wow, Benjamin, your work is really, you are a cultural critic, aren't you?
I don't know, Leslie. What would you say? I love culture. I'm a culture creator.
No, I don't mean criticize. I mean, critic, like you analyze it and synthesize and like contextualize. That's what I mean by critic. Like,
yeah. Well, I've been steep in this. It's really funny because this is Leslie's first foray into this phenomena that I've been engaged in perpetually since I started entering into and documenting the gender issue. That radical feminists, or what we're calling radical feminists right now, they have a tendency on a slow news day to have a moral panic about the smallest little misbehavior on behalf of a man, like whether the man is wearing the wrong article of clothing or making a funny joke or like just a sentence. They focus a lot of their aggressive outrage on men, and it's just like this. It'll happen every 3 or 6 months. It's been a while for me since I got in the thick of things, but it would happen perpetually, and Leslie's now seeing the full magnitude of this swarm.
Well, but I don't see it quite as I mean, I kind of have a problem with the idea of this putting people in these big categories, because I wouldn't say that every single person that's been kind of nasty online recently, I'm sure they don't all identify themselves as being in the same category. They all have each person's an individual with their own individual problem. And there's this, I think that the ability to be swept up in a group rage is something that has been around a lot longer than radical feminists have. So to ascribe all of this to just feminists is, I think, to pin it on in the wrong place in the timeline. This is what we're seeing is like people are getting caught up in an emotional storm and then acting in this dehumanizing, nasty way.
Yeah, I think Benjamin's just saying this current iteration of revolutionary, whatever you want to call it, this current iteration was feminism.
I don't disagree with that.
The first wave of this current cultural weirdness. But yeah,
There's
you're right.
Plenty of men doing it too. Yeah.
Oh, male feminists.
Well, I think feminism is interesting because a friend pointed out to me that feminism, I don't know, maybe this is a discussion, I guess, but how did feminism came about, at least second wave feminism is specifically what I think Benjamin's referring to, second wave feminism, because of the pill. Or largely, sexual revolution, all these cultural currents were happening around the same time. And where did the pill come from? Big
patriarchy.
Pharma.
Yeah.
Big Pharma. This is like, I start going down the rabbit hole when I think about this. So I'm like,
No, the pill, that's a really interesting one. I'd love to talk with somebody who's done some research on that, because I do think it's been I think the normalization of pharmacological technology into our lives is really dangerous. And it's become sort of a standard that young women will be on the pill. And I think that it has such an impact on our feelings and our behavior that we're not acknowledging. I can't imagine how much of a change that's created in our culture.
Well, I mean, think about what we were talking about right before the live stream about morality and how we approach sex. Because the pill can't. I mean, there were condoms, but now we have the pill. Now the woman is now, because we're always the ones who potentially are have to worry about pregnancy, right? Worrying about pregnancy every single time you have sex, even with condoms. Like, you're kind of dependent on the man, right, to make sure. But like with the pill, now it's like, oh, sex, you're removing this huge piece that's always been attached to sex. Like, I don't have to worry about pregnancy. So now that changes the whole rules of engagement now with sex. Like, now I'm doing it I can do it for any number of reasons, some of which may be quite healthy and maybe some of people moving towards more connection with somebody, and some people like using it for all kinds of other reasons, for avoidance or to be liked or God knows what else. I mean, I think it changed the entire sexual landscape, and it was kind of concurrent with the sexual revolution.
Well, I think it changed things in some cultural ways, but also in some biological ways, because messing with people's hormones, that changes the individual and what they're attracted to, what they're interested in. You know, it changes so much more than just the overt stuff that you think, the like the benefits that are being sold along with it. But there's also these changes that we're not aware of in what it does to our structure.
Well, I think aren't a lot of people aware of the depression, and it lowers your libido in some ways. Yeah, there's all kinds of, and then it gets into the water. Yeah, is that what you're talking about? All these physical implications, many of which we probably don't know about.
Oh, so there's somebody in the chat who wants to get right into the conversation about the AGP. Georgina Whitby. Let's see.
Oh,
Georgina Whitby says, it says, platforming a self-proclaimed fetishist in his fetish gear at a conference on children and youth treatments isn't an issue of mere clothing. A self-proclaimed fetishist in a dress isn't equal to every other type of man in a dress, and the former has no place in deciding what happens for children. Don't be too vicious in judging those who lack manners because of their battle-worn stance. I will say the very first word used there, platforming. I have a problem with that right off the bat. I'm so tired of the censorship.
What does that mean?
It's a criticism that I had a conversation with Phil Illey and had put that out yesterday. And I'm like, that's so, yeah, please, Ben.
Just Georgina might be talking about GenSpect platforming.
Okay,
Phil,
maybe.
And the way that they did that was in two ways, just for the sake of the recording. One, they put his book on a list of recommended reading that they have since removed. And the book blurb is kind of curious. We can go into that. It's kind of curious. I think that actually gives foundation to the arguments of against Phil. The blurb that he very likely wrote himself. And then secondly, they tweeted a tweet with him. Well, they X'd an X with him and a detransitioner. And then there was a trans woman, like full-blown trans woman right behind them that
nobody said anything about.
Yeah. And so that they retweeted that tweet and just showing what the conference is doing. Like, here's this person with this person, this person, this person. Also, we should mention that from what I know, and this might not be completely accurate, but from what I know, one of the last speakers at the conference who was a detransitioner went on Kelly J. Keen's podcast and said that Phil's presence as a man in a dress triggered her trauma around men, and she felt very unsafe.
What about the trans women? Was she bothered by the fact that there were trans people there as well? Trans women and trans men? I know people have gotten mad that I've used those words. I will be very specific about what I mean. Males who have made cosmetic and surgical and hormonal changes to themselves in order to present more feminine and vice versa. So that's what I mean by those words.
I do not know that. And that's a good question. And I think that when we talk about, so for anybody who doesn't know, there was a GenSpect conference in Denver. GenSpect's stated goal right now is to provide an alternative to medicalization for gender distressed youth specifically, and gender dysphoric or whatever more broadly. They want to provide a very solid ground for non-medical interventions. And their conference and their goal is to have as wide an umbrella as possible of people that are willing to engage on this topic. And some of them are medical professionals, some of them are psychologists, counselors, coaches, all the other words that you guys have for sitting in a room and talking to somebody with a very nice voice. Tell me your inner thoughts. And then there's detransitioners, there's cultural critics, such as myself, James Lindsay. There's biologists, there's researchers of all different stripes. So an organization like SAGM is very targeted to talk to and for and with medical professionals. GenSpect includes medical professionals, but also a lot of other types of people with a lot of different other opinions. And there's a lot of parents there too, in varying states of dealing with their child going through this process. It was an open conference. You paid I guess it was $500, and then you had to pay for your room and board, except for the speakers. Of course, the speakers, are there, so they get paid varying amounts. And Phil Illy bought a ticket. Phil Illy is a self-professed autogynephile, which means that he has some sense of an inner femininity that he is in love with. And there is a sexual component or compulsion involved in that. But in his book, and insofar as I've spoken with him, it's much broader than just a sexual fetish for him. It's actually an orientation. This is just how he orients himself to the world. And erotic desire is a compulsion, is part of how we orient ourselves to our world, and actually informs a lot of the decisions that we make in the world, including, but not limited to, how we dress. And so a lot of the people who are against him are saying that he was wearing fetish gear, as though him wearing a dress was the same as him wearing a ball gag and like triple Z prosthetic breasts. Like it's all the same thing. It's all the same thing. And so because he says that he's getting off on, or there's a sexual component to his wanting to present femininely, is then subjecting other people without their consent to his sexual fetish or to his unhealthy sexuality. And so when you get down into the weeds, the question I have is, how do we police? Should GenSpect have a dress code? And if so, then how should that dress code be based on sex? To what degree do we police each other's dress based on sex? And how far do we go with that? How do we navigate that? Do we want hijabs for men? Men should just be wearing just like you can only see men's eyes. So this is a man and he's danger to you at all times, but also, should we be more professional in our dress or not?
Well, so I want to just point out, Georgina responded back and said, platforming is misused by censors. I don't want to censor anyone. There's a difference between the public square and centering people in conference contexts. And then she also says, the worst thing about this stupid spat, it's distracting from the real debates. And I would agree with that second one, except that I think the process is the point. And the point for me is the mobbing. It's the nasty behavior. It's that same kind of, I'm not going to listen to anything you have to say. I'm just going to be mad. I'm going to make these false equivalencies and be angry about my false equivalencies. And I'm going to force I've just seen such nasty behavior over the last couple of days. And it's really shocking from people who have big accounts, who have a lot of followers and post a lot of like reasonable things, who are allowing themselves to engage in these lower level behaviors just because they feel strongly about something. And I think the idea that you can set aside your morality because of your feelings about an issue is a problem.
Well, that being the question, what is morality, right?
Yeah.
Like, is it based upon a principle that can be applied to every situation, or is it relative, which is kind of a woke thing, but it doesn't have to be just a woke thing. Like, is it contextual?
I don't suspect that people that are behaving and acting out in any way considered whether they were behaving appropriately, right? Like they're in reaction mode, right? So I don't even know if anyone's considering whether they're behaving in a way that they think is
right
in alignment with anything, right? There's just like freak out.
Mm-hmm.
And
you're not
there's
allowed
like
to point out
to ride on with everybody else being disturbed.
You're not allowed to point out the inappropriateness of their behavior, or the emotionality or irrational. Well, I am not. Maybe you can, but I know what they'll do to you. It's like, oh, you're playing the emotional woman trope. They're already running a script where you can't critique them in their appropriateness, but they're allowed to critique you.
Well, a lot of them have been men.
You're not being appropriate.
I'll just say it's not all women.
This is the bigger issue too on all these fronts, right? Where anyone who feels like they're in the victim position or the oppressed position thinks they have the permission to just behave in any sort of way as though they're just not subject. And this is on almost everything we're looking at, whether it's from crime or what's in the Middle East, whatever, right? Like there is this
Russia,
like
Ukraine. This has
I'm
happened
not,
over and
I'm
over
not subject
again.
to this anymore, you know.
This just keeps happening. I just keep watching with. I'm just like continually disappointed in people that I don't know. It's just like
Lower your
every
expectations,
single-
Jody.
Every single, I know, right? Every single time there's an issue, people just immediately scramble emotionally into their corners, and I'm like, but how did you get there so fast? Like, why? I don't even like, do you even understand what's going on that fast? Like, it's just like, and it seems to be aligned along fault. There seem to be fault lines. And yeah, it's just like some of these issues are really complex. And I'm like, well, how do you get so emotional and so angry? Like when I'm like, do you even know? Like with the Russia-Ukraine thing, I remember in a comment on Twitter, Benjamin, I was driving around Northampton one day and all of a sudden I see all these Ukraine flags everywhere. Like everywhere. Everyone's flying one. And I'm like, so I made a quip on Twitter. I just said, I see a lot of Ukraine flags around. It's like people cheering for their favorite sports team. And people were like really angry, like, how dare you? This is such a horrible thing. It's like, well, I wasn't really commenting about the actual issue. I was more commenting on how it felt like people were treating it. Like all of a sudden, like, go Ukraine. Like, it's like, do you ever even connect it to Ukraine? I don't know. Like, I didn't even know there were that many Ukrainians in Northampton, or like, it just felt like this feels like a woke thing again. Like kind of, like I was more kind of commenting on the what I felt to be kind of a shallow emotionality, but people miss that nuance, I guess. When you're emotional, you tend to miss the nuance. But it feels like this has been happening a lot, and it happened for me too. My big wake up was with the mandates and the lockdowns, like merely expressing some skepticism. I wouldn't say I'm against this or I'm for this. I was just like, maybe we should be asking some questions about this. And just the vitriol, I was like, wow, people have already locked in and this side and that side. Yeah. I think that's what you're talking about, Leslie, like this like quick rooting into a side.
Mm-hmm. Well, and like the last thing that just pops up in the chat, Gen X-Ray says he knows exactly what he's doing. AGPs are ignoring boundaries because of sexual fetish. Why are you defending his kink with the same be kind and attacking women's feelings? And that's the thing is like, I'm not.
See what I say? You can never criticize tone. They can police dress, but you can't police tone.
No, and I wouldn't defend
every single time
his kink or whatever. If we're talking about like our own values, our own perspectives, I probably think a lot of things are kink and are outside of the boundaries of good sexual morality that many people think are very normal. I mean, I've got a very conservative morality around this, but I want to hear people out. I want to meet them where they are and hear and understand and not ascribe things to them that they're not saying. I want to understand with openness, and I'm curious about these things. And I don't necessarily feel like it's my place to be making judgments about these things. And some of the arguments that I've heard are exaggerations or misrepresentations, and that irrationality is the part that I'm calling out. It's the attack and the irrationality is the thing I'm calling out. I'm not trying to defend someone.
So there's a lot of mind reading too, right? Like definite mind reading. So yeah.
Isn't there some boundary to like, isn't there a sense of like, we were talking right before about, well, if you didn't know that if this person hadn't come out saying, I have AGP and this is my thing, like, and it was just another guy in a dress, like, would you feel the same way? And it's kind of like, it reminds me of like, I don't know, like, at some point you have to be responsible for your own feelings. Like if somebody elicits a feeling in you for whatever reason, whether AGP or you just don't like the way, or they remind you of somebody that hurt you a long time ago, at some point, like you need to take care of yourself, right? If there is a line between ascribing responsibility to this other person for your feelings, right? There's kind of a codependent, it feels a little codependent to me, and it feels, I don't know. I was gonna say something. I forgot what it was. Like
So
it's kind of, you know what I
let me
mean?
let me try to specify this complaint about the fetish. So if a man in a dress is not neutral, it's not a neutral signifier. So it's a social signal, and that signal can be read in several different ways. One person might think it's ridiculous. One person like ridiculous, like I'm going to ridicule you and laugh at you in your face, you know. Another person's like, well, that's kind of odd, or what, that grabbed my attention. Why is he wearing this? So like curiosity, like, oh, what's this? Like, what are you doing? What's going on over here? Another reaction could be, this man wants to perform a fetish in public, and he wants me to look at him getting off on dressing like a woman. Like that's another interpretation that would fit along this spectrum. To what degree or extent is that particular response valid, and how, to what extent should society say, okay, you know, if this is triggering for this subset, then we should probably respect this person over here who's really triggered. To what degree is Phil responsible for the reactions that other people have? It's not zero. We're all responsible for how we make people feel.
So
Yeah, I don't know. It's a
It's
dynamic.
not zero, or
I
is
want to
it zero?
ask a question though. This is the question: is that this seems to be the problem isn't he's in a dress, it's that he's openly talked about AGP, but according to his hypothesis is that most trans people, at least most trans women who are men who are presenting as female ish, are whatever. I've gotten in so much trouble recently for that word, so I don't know how to use it right now.
Don't let them control your speech. Just
Okay.
say it, and if they misinterpret, make fun of them.
Okay, so if he's correct that this is the same etiology behind most men who transition is this AGP orientation, that's what he says, then the only difference between Phil and the other trans women in the conference would be that he's open about it and hasn't medicalized. And so it's more offensive to see a man who still identifies as a man, who isn't trying to be a woman, playing with his gender, than it is to see a man who has done medical alterations to himself and now says that he's a woman. So this is kind of interesting. And this is the crux of this for me. It's that there's more, like you mentioned in that particular picture that was so offensive to so many people, right behind him is a trans woman, right? Right behind him is a man who has transitioned to present as female, who is presenting full female. And that causes no problem for people, even if that person, and I don't know, I'm not going to project this onto that person, but if according to Phil's, hypothesis, there's two etiologies. There's either he was a homosexual and transitioned, or he's autogynephile and he transitioned. So the problem seems to be with the presence of a man who is not claiming to be a woman, but playing with women's appearances.
But the problem is because he's signifying that he is a danger to women, that he's making women feel unsafe, and it's inappropriate and it's callous of him to not take their feelings into account. But
if he's not someone who would invade women's spaces, because he's not going into the restroom because he's still a man.
And if he's not pitching a tent in his moo-moos, then
This reminds me of in New York. I lived in New York City for many years, and every once in a while you get a guy on the train who unzip his pants and start jerking off and stare at you or whatever. And there obviously that whole thing is, I was speaking to Benjamin, like, am I doing this to elicit a response? Like, doing that, I think the part of the getting off is because you want to elicit this, like, oh my God, like they're getting off on that, doing it in public, specifically looking at a woman to try to elicit some response from her. That's the sexual thing for them. So in my mind, it's like, well, they're going to do what they're going to do. They're going to say their AGP, they're going to jerk off, whatever. Like, the response is either like, oh my God, and run away and they get off, or you could just look at them and be like, really?
Well,
Are you
and
serious?
Ash Brown says he's not playing with gender. He's aroused by what he's wearing. It's not a style choice. And my question, I think that that's an important question is, does a person who has a fetish also have a humanity? Do they also get to make style choices? And
Like an
could there be
aesthetic.
room for him to also choose to dress in a certain way that you don't like?
Why wouldn't, like, people are walking around with that stuff all the time. They might not announce it. There could be like any number of people sitting in a playground staring at children and getting off. Like,
Leslie and I were in Hawaii and we kind of got married, but after that we went to a beach. and the beach was amazing. Leslie was like, "This is the cleanest sand I've ever felt." You put it on your toes, and it was black sand. It was this black sand, so it was like crushed volcanic rock, and it would brush right off. And we were there, and I walked over to get. I was looking. I thought we'd left something somewhere, so I walked over to another part of the beach, and there was this girl, this young woman, probably in her early 20s, with this huge booty. And
I should never leave you alone at the beach.
And her girlfriend was taking pictures of her booty, and the booty had these like little black sands, like imprints on it, right? So she's wearing this bikini, she's got this booty, and then they're taking pictures of her with this black sand on it. And I knew right away, I clocked them as Instagram models, right? So they're producing in public sexual content. Right.
Yeah.
They're trying to elicit a sexual response from their followers because that's what gets them attention and that's what makes them viable. Now, they themselves aren't getting off on that, but you probably know they may or may not be getting off. Maybe that they are. But
yeah, what
for
constitutes
certain, they're
off?
getting attention because they're eliciting men's orgasm or erotic attention. So there's a feedback loop. So it's more acceptable in our current culture right now. It's more acceptable for a woman to elicit erotic attention in public than it is for a man to express his sexuality in public, right? So this is just the asymmetry that I'm interested in, is that are the women who want to tell Phil based on his sexuality, are the people who want to police Phil's dress because it's a sexual signifier willing to police women's clothing by ascribing to women intent in wearing yoga pants and wearing halter tops and not going around with a bra and showing ankles? Like, to what degree do we start to police people's dress based on erotic attention?
So
And how far are we willing to go?
Abracadabra calls out that they're not being predatory.
well, now you get into the power thing, right? Men have more power, therefore men. You start to get into that. Like, why isn't it predatory by women? Well, because men are bigger and stronger. I mean, you start to getting into
Men are
that.
the active ones. Deborah, are you muted?
That
You're
probably,
muted.
but the women aren't.
Deborah, the
Right?
first part of you cut out. Could you say that
Oh,
again?
sorry. Well, I'd say that the men are probably, on average, liking to see the women doing what they're doing, but the women with the man don't want to see it. So there's an asymmetry there.
I want to see it.
Give me some.
I enjoy that kind of thing.
Which kind of thing? The butts or the man in a dress?
Man expressing. Well, I don't really get off on a man in a dress. No.
I didn't have a creepy feeling to it. I told Benjamin this like last night. He's like, well, we were talking about how people responded and whether there were women at the conference who felt uncomfortable. And I thought,
And there were.
I said, and I understand that there were, but personally, I don't think that that's a universal. I saw him and I thought, wow, he looks like fun. I mean, he's got bright blue glasses and he's got these bright, like blue arm things. He looked like a raver kind of. He just had this fun hipster thing going on. And I didn't get that, but then I'm leaving room for people to feel differently than me about it.
If a gay man expresses himself flamboyantly, and maybe it's kind of sexy, like Freddie Mercury, or kind of on the edge of acceptable dress, right? It's probably not as threatening to women, but it's the same sort of sexual signal. He's getting off on looking a certain way, or his erotic orientation is informing how he expresses himself in public, but it's not ascribed the same value because it's not violating women. Right. So the issue isn't whether or not he's acting out his sexuality. It's that some sexualities are make some women uncomfortable. Some sexual signals make women uncomfortable and others don't. So it's not just it's okay for women to wear yoga pants. It's okay for a gay man to not wear a shirt or whatever he wants to do. But ball gag is too far, right? Like bondage play is too far, furry play is too far, AGP is also too far.
Everybody has it too far. The lines are different places for different people, which is why I don't know. This whole thing reminds me of the woke stuff. Like, you're responsible for me being uncomfortable, therefore you need to change your shit. It's like, well, sometimes you're going to be uncomfortable around people. That's just discomfort is part of life, and it's like, at some point, like, when do you ask somebody else to, you have to do this? Because
I don't think that it was appropriate for a man to have an erection at the GenSpec conference, a visible erection. I think we can rule that out. Or men using women. No, it didn't.
Well, yeah, I don't think it's appropriate for a man to be in a girl's locker room with walking around with an erection either.
Yeah.
I think we have some, like,
there is a line.
Reasons, but that's an actual, like, behavior as opposed to, I don't know how somebody's dressing. Yeah, it's pretty murky. Yeah.
See?
I'm curious what Jennifer thinks. We haven't heard from Jennifer yet.
I feel that I am a very, very boring person right about now, because just the conversation in and of itself makes me feel like I have been drugged. It's just, I just think it's all really flipping odd. I find the whole thing terribly, terribly odd. And that's nothing against anybody, but I'm allowed to find things odd. And I just find it odd. I find all of this, I'm really, men who want to dress as women, I find that odd. Women who want to dress as men, I find it odd, regardless of if it's identity or if it's autogynephilia. I just think it is genuinely really very odd. And so I always feel a little bit tripped out in these conversations. I don't have anything terribly wise to say, other than I'm surprised that it's gotten to the point where it's, I know this stuff has always gone on, but it used to be so fringe that it wasn't in the forefront of our minds. And now it's more sort of at the forefront of our minds. And I find that disorienting.
Now it feels a little more like,
yeah.
Like, sometimes it's like it's almost boring in a way when people, like this guy Phil. I don't know. I haven't seen him. I don't know what his vibe is, but there seems to be, like, with some
his vibe is not predatory. His dress. I understand that certain women are triggered by his dress.
We're like, look at me, look at me, look at me, look at me, and in a way, that's kind of like that kind of person is like, nah.
He also does circus performing, which is kind of part of that. Yeah. So. I guess my own personal bias in all of this is that I think that the medical procedures people are doing in order to cosmetically change themselves are really harmful. And I think that that's the part that concerns me the most for people, is this.
Yeah, absolutely.
This medicalization, and the fact that I think it's really unethical for medical providers to be selling this to people and doing these things to the extent that we're seeing them done. And then I have questions about what's the slippery slope? Where is it okay to have cosmetic surgery, cosmetic procedures, and where's the line? And I don't know what the answer to that is. I think that's a conversation that's important to have. But to me, what I saw represented in this person was somebody who has like for whatever reason, he's decided there's a backstop on this. I want to play with this thing. I want to feminize, but I'm not going medical. And that represented a good thing to me. So maybe it's just because I'm so biased about my concern around the medical stuff that seeing somebody represent okay, well, we can find a middle ground where we're allowed, like and it feels like it's the thing that we've been saying for a long time is play with your identity all you want, play with your clothes all you want, but don't call yourself a woman and stop hurting your body.
Yeah, no,
So
I think people absolutely, I think people absolutely have a right to explore their own sexuality and their identity. And I think that's part of, especially in young people, it can be really part of growing up and figuring out who you are. But yeah, of course, knowing what we know now about the effect of puberty blockers and hormones and these surgeries and how they really don't offer people what they purport to offer, I have big concern with that for people.
Can I jump on that point? So
please.
At the conference, I had a quite a deep conversation with a completely passable trans woman or trans identified male, completely passable. Other than the height, you would not have known. The
not
voice, the cheekbones, like the hair, the movements, just totally passable. And this person was there. This person has a pretty high job in a pretty prestigious institution, but it's just completely under the radar, and was there, had made decisions. Very fascinating story. And they opened up to me, and we had a deep conversation. And I really pressured them. I asked really hard questions about what they were doing to themselves and the choices they make, how their choices affect the people around them, and how their choices affect their ability to connect to people around them, because it is a major thing. And this person was completely willing to talk about. They were there at that conference to learn more and to be open. And the conversation that we're having about Phil, I think it's an important conversation. And in time, I want to actually like suss out, like, if we're going to police boundaries and if this is a safeguarding issue, how do we rationally decide what normative behavior should be? Because I think that we all have normative behavior, but if we do this in the proper way, if we navigate towards a place where everybody can feel safe being there, then people such as that trans woman or trans identified male can then have a place where they can really deeply see what is motivating their behavior, what is, and we can all see what is healthy behavior, what's not healthy behavior. If this person has a compulsion to present as a woman, what's behind that? And can they go through the process of understanding why that is without a bunch of people calling them an evil fetishist who's just going around assaulting women by looking like a woman. That person that I spoke to was a really kind, really gentle, really deep thinking person, was not in it for maybe there's a sexual compulsion there somewhere, but the compulsion was way down there, and in public, it wasn't about getting off at all. So if everybody who's AGP or who's non-homosexual, transsexual is put into the bucket of fetishist and should be ridiculed and driven out of polite society, I don't think that that's beneficial. I don't think that that's beneficial to those individuals or to society in general, because you're going to have a lot of males who are going to lash out on that. And it's totally unacceptable that autogynephiles are going into women's bathrooms and women's shelters and women's locker rooms and getting off on that. That is a true phenomenon.
Yeah.
These men, there are a lot of men who are getting off, who are literally ejaculating to the thought of doing this. Not all men who have the sexual compulsion take it to that level.
Right.
Just like while a woman wearing yoga pants in the grocery store is pleasing to the eye, I restrain myself, and I even look away, especially if Leslie's right there, because I don't want her looking at other people. So
sometimes he points them out, though. So.
Sometimes they're really pointing at me. They really want me to point at them. Like, they just like Badoinga,
So if we had my sexual morality, Benjamin, that would not be okay.
Poppers and a cock ring. That's all I'd have.
Jeez.
Yeah, well, that kind of seems like consent, right? When you were talking about like going into a locker room and none of the women want them there, but like using the status as like I'm actually a woman, respect my gender, to ejaculate, like that's not a consensual. You're like including other people, and you're creating this dynamic where the other people don't didn't consent to it.
Well,
But-
that's
right,
what that's the critique of Phil is. He
Right,
didn't
I
ask
get
for
that.
his.
I get that. Yeah. So where's the line?
Where's the line, and how do we
But is
know?
he getting off in that moment? Like he's not jerking off, right? Like
Well,
guess
all
in
I
your
know
own
is that the
mind-
publicity for his book, the detractors of him have boosted the footprint of his book. Like they have given his
Oh,
book
yeah.
a whole bunch of attention. So either way, he comes out ahead. Either way, he comes out
Well,
ahead.
that's the new PR
Hopefully all
model.
of us can hopefully all of us can actually like drill down on these issues and allow for our priors to be questioned, allow for us to have these uncomfortable conversations and to kind of come to some sort of consensus or at least some sort of flexibility around this where we can make reasonable determinations on how we expect other people to behave, because we can't not expect other people to behave, to dress, to express themselves within a Overton window of appropriateness. There is that thing. So who polices this, how it is policed is the real conversation as far as I'm concerned.
Think radfems of anything, but it does seem like, yeah, coming back with, we do actually believe there should be norms of some sort. We actually do care about safeguarding. I can see probably people that are upset about paraphilias are immediately thinking, well, if we let this okay, then it's going to be minor attracted people and then it's going to be whatever. So I don't know how much like really just saying like, yeah, yes, like there is a line that we got to find it, but like, yes, I agree with that, not maybe where you're putting it.
That's an interesting, the minor attracted people. So let's put this argument, like, let's say somebody comes out, I'm a minor attracted person, I'm a MAP, Is that is that where we would say, well, you can come do this? They might pass a background check. They might not have ever actually done anything with a child, but they're out saying, I'm a MAP. They're inside their own brain, they're attracted, and they might not have any intention. Is that person somebody to be like, oh no, you can't go on the playground? Like, well, and the same thing with pedophilia in general, like love of children, like it doesn't, there's a distinction between behavior, acting it out, and just it being in your own head. And I would say racism as well. Somebody's racist inside their own head, having racist thoughts, like hating people just because of their skin color. Is that an actual threat? Like, isn't the behavior is the thing that's concerning?
What I would bring into the conversation is that we are in our culture, whether by design or just by the slippage of degeneration, it's not enough to have a sexuality. You have to celebrate your sexuality. So in a world where pride is like shoved down our throats, in a world where there's a huge social capital for children to come out as trans, it's a different conversation. So something like a orientation such as like pedophilia in this current environment, you got to be really careful, because if it's not just that we're going to tolerate this, it's that we're going to celebrate this, and everybody's going to be on this bandwagon. So until we fix the cultural trendiness of these of celebrating sexuality, we have to be really doubly careful. Now, I'm not saying wood chippers, but they're, like, I'm not saying wood chippers, but I understand that people are saying, yeah, let's bring out the wood chipper, because we've allowed these perverts to take over more and more and more and more and more of our cultural capital and to abuse our children more and more and more. Where is it going to end? There's got to be a line here. So so when it comes to the MAPs, I would really be careful before venturing to where those monsters are.
Well, it does seem like part of it is that you get into trouble when you say the quiet part out loud. And that's kind of the thing with the Phil thing is if he didn't say this thing that is so untouchable in the gender conversation, then he wouldn't have caused the stir that he caused.
I wonder why
is my attraction to a woman and assault on that woman. To what degree is my feeling of sexual attraction like actually an assault on just the feeling?
No, it's not at all. Zero extent. Now, if you engaged in behavior that made somebody really uncomfortable, like obviously leering, especially at a woman who can't get away from you, someone who's like stuck in a business meeting with you, someone who's stuck in a subway car with you, and you're leering and your behavior is making the person uncomfortable, then I think it's a problem. But if you're behaving completely normally, but thinking all kinds of outrageous thoughts in your head, I think that's completely allowable within your own brain, because that is a private domain as far as I'm concerned. But I also want to say, like, in reference to this, this moment, and hopefully it's only a moment, but I doubt it, that we're having in our culture where everybody's sexuality and everybody's identity has to be constantly celebrated. I think that is the biggest problem with all of this, because I think people have a right to how they think and feel about these things, and to demand that somebody else celebrate you, to me, is just the height of narcissism. We don't get to determine how other people see us. And somebody may very well genuinely feel and believe that they are the opposite sex from that which they're born in. And I think that is their business. But to try to tell everybody else, you must also believe that and you must celebrate it, is just a violation of people's individual rights.
What ties to this too is just how much is in the public sphere, right? I'm not saying everybody go back into their closet, but there is this, like, everything is in the public sphere. I'm going to just show you, not just like Phil, but like there's this general mood of, I'm going to tell everybody everything I do and everything, whether it's celebrated or not, as opposed to when it used to be kept much more as a private sphere matter. Like, dump the contents of my entire mind out and everybody knows.
Yeah, I think it's well, that's a whole trend anyway. Like all our photos and videos, everything's on the cloud. We're outsourcing our inner life at a very rapid rate. And intimacy, I think, is this notion of privacy and sexuality. It's like, to me, that's sexier than having if it's all out there. Like, how is it erotic anymore? I don't know. There's something about intimacy that I feel like is under attack. And I felt very concerned about this for a while. Like, that's our ultimate connection with another human being, and that's kind of we're kind of outsourcing that. I'm like, that's just more disconnection, like the ultimate one,
we're dissipating it by spreading it out so far instead of it being concentrated
so it
and
loses
combustible. That's right. Yeah,
when it's private between two people, it's powerful for those two people. When you get in there and kind of we're outsourcing it, like spreading it all around, then we're no longer powerful. Those two people are no longer have that little power unit. And I think, I don't know if you're conspiracy theorist like me, it's on purpose. And along with the sexuality stuff, like the LGBTQIA, to celebrate. As somebody once said, like, in the wokosphere, that is the only identity that is one can opt into. All the rest are like fixed, like skin color, your class, I guess, your ethnicity. Like, that's the one. So it's almost like recruiting or something for the wokosphere. I forget who said that. It's like a more numbers or something. Sorry, I can't speak intelligently on this. But the intimacy thing really, really bothers me. I mean, people are increasingly just having sex online, and not even with other people, increasingly with AI, video game, VR goggles, and losing the ability. I mean, Leslie, you touched on porn, young men, like, some of them have never even had sex. They're 30 years old because they can't. That's disturbing.
Mm-hmm. Can I say something that'll get me in trouble?
You always
absolutely
do.
The same mechanism that enables, let's just say, a man, for sake of this argument, the same mechanism that enables a man to get off on a virtual representation of sexual activity through the internet is the same mechanism that allows a woman to get off or to experience a state of arousal seeing a man in a dress at a conference thousands of miles away and feeling unsafe about that. Like, this projection of my own personal limbic system into this world where these things happened over there back in time. Like, that same mechanism is allowing this really heightened state of arousal meaning negative or positive, to occur. And people need to learn to control their emotions and really try to work to plug their limbic system into reality, into a intimate relationship, into their own space of, you know, whether or not they are in danger, but in a constant state of arousal, whether positive or negative, it's going to burn you out, and you're not going to be able to do anything or really engage with the world around you, because you're always going to be in a heightened state. Oh no, Ukraine. Oh no, COVID. Oh no, autogynephile on a mountain. He was on a mountain. He was right there, and they're platforming. Oh, it's not safe, you know, or you know, like in the other way with a man, like cooming all the time, right? It's just like, we need to come back, unplug from the matrix, touch the grass, ask for consent, and touch a booty, right?
Eat the mushrooms.
Touch a booty.
Touch the grass.
But no touching booties in grocery stores, Benjamin, unless it's Leslie's.
Yeah. No. Where are you? I don't know where you are.
PDA, Jennifer, PDA advocate. All right. Well, we'll have to leave it at that. Jennifer's got her group, and I've got to get my
Thank you,
kids to
guys.
tutoring. Thanks, everybody, for joining us.
Fun times.
And thanks in the chat.
Thanks, Benjamin.
All right.
Love you all.